Good evening, everybody. This is your favorite aspiring classicist here, a wandering author, reminding you that we're all the authors of our own lives. As always, my message remains the same. Spend less, live more, earn your freedom with frugality. And today, we're going to see what Aristotle has to say about bestiality. No, not that kind. He's talking about, like, people that have been abused and turn into develop morbid habits. But still, it is funny that's what the translation has. So let's begin. This is book 7, chapter 5. It's a little longer than the last one, but there's definitely some good stuff in here. And remember, book 7 is all about vices, and Aristotle classifies vice as vice, bestiality, and unrestraint. So far, we've only really been discussing unrestraint, but we're going to expand our scope a little bit now. Besides those things, however, which are naturally pleasant, of which some are pleasant generally, and others pleasant to particular races of animals and of men, there are other things not naturally pleasant, which become pleasant either as a result of arrested development or from habit, or in some cases owing to natural depravity. So there are some pleasures that it's natural to have. Food and sex. I don't know if Aristotle counts wine in there. He probably classifies that with food. And then there are other things that are not pleasant naturally, but they can become pleasant as a result of arrested development, meaning like you're retarded, like the medical definition of it. Or if you do something habitually, you can develop it, or you're naturally depraved. Now, corresponding to each of these kinds of unnatural pleasures, we may observe a related disposition of character. I mean bestial characters, like the creature in woman's form that is said to rip up pregnant females and devour their offspring. He's referencing some kind of folk tale about a creature that resembles a woman but is said to attack pregnant women and eat their babies. Or certain savage tribes on the coasts of the Black Sea, who are alleged to delight in raw meat or in human flesh. So like cannibals. That would be another example of a bestial character as a cannibal, in Aristotle's eyes. And others among whom each in turn provides a child for the common banquet. So cannibals that eat their children, they provide a kid for the banquet. These are instances of bestiality. Eating your own child is an instance of bestiality. Really, the word bestiality, that's why bestial is sometimes used, but beast-like or brutish. Other unnatural propensities are due to disease, and sometimes to insanity, as in the case of the madman that offered up his mother to the gods and partook of the sacrifice. Other morbid propensities are acquired by habit. For instance, plucking out the hair, biting the nails, eating cinders and earth, and also sexual perversion. So even sexual perversion, Aristotle says, is acquired by habit. So if you do any of that stuff, maybe stop. These practices result in some cases from natural disposition and in others from habit, as with those who have been abused from childhood. However, if you're an abused child, I guess I have a little more forgiveness for you. But still. When nature is responsible, no one would describe such a person as showing unrestraint anymore, nor should we class as unrestraint a morbid state brought about by habitual indulgence. Now, these various morbid dispositions in themselves do not fall within the limits of vice. One so constituted by nature to be frightened by everything, even the sound of a mouse, shows the cowardice of a lower animal. The man who was afraid of a weasel was a case of disease. So if you're frightened by everything in nature, then Aristotle says that you show the cowardice of a lower animal, and that it might be a case of disease. And he goes on to say, so with folly, which is like foolishness, people irrational by nature and living solely by sensation, like certain remote tribes of barbarians, belong to the bestial class. Those who lose their reason owing to some disease, such as epilepsy or insanity, to the morbid. With these unnatural propensities, it is possible in some cases merely to have the disposition and not yield to it. Or it is possible not merely to possess, but to yield to the propensity. Only natural vices receive the name vice, and other kinds are called bestial or morbid in turn. This is also the case with unrestraint. It is clear, then, that self-restraint and unrestraint relate only to the objects to which temperance and profligacy are related. And then he goes on and he says, let us now consider the point that unrestraint and anger, also called lack of control of the spirit, if you have a rowdy spirit, that is less disgraceful than unrestraint in the desires. Now it appears that anger does to some extent hear reason, but hears it wrong, just as hasty waiters hurry out of the room before they heard the whole of what you are saying, and so mistake your order. So it's less disgraceful to yield to anger than it is to your other things like food and sex, desires for those. Similarly, anger, owing to the heat and swiftness of its nature, hears but does not hear given and rushes off to take the vengeance. When reason or imagination suggests that an insult or slight has been received, anger flares up at once, but after reasoning, as it were, that you ought to make war on anybody who insults you. Desire, on the other hand, at a mere hint from the senses that a thing is pleasant, rushes off to enjoy it. So Aristotle's argument that anger is not as bad as desire is basically that hence anger follows reason in a manner, but desire does not. Therefore, yielding to desire is more disgraceful than yielding to anger, for he that fails to restrain his anger is in a way controlled by reason, but the other is controlled not by reason but by desire. Again, when impulses are natural, it is more excusable to follow them, since even with the desires it is more excusable to follow those that are common to all men, and insofar as they are common. So, if everybody else is doing something, Aristotle says that it's more excusable. I don't know if I agree with that one, to be quite honest. But let's continue. But anger and bad temper are more natural than desire for excessive and unnecessary pleasures. Witness the man who is had for eating his father, beating his father, and who said in his defense, well, my father used to beat his father, and he used to beat his. And so will my son here beat me when he grows up. It runs in our family. So, anger and bad temper are more natural. And then, here's one of my favorite quotes from this chapter. Again, the craftier men are, the more unjust they are. Now the hot-tempered man is not crafty, nor is anger, but open, whereas desire is crafty. Here's another reason why yielding to anger is not as bad as yielding to desire. Desire is crafty, but anger is not. Again, a wanton outrage, which means just getting angry for no reason, gives pleasure to the doer, never pain, whereas an act done in anger always causes him a feeling of pain. So if you're actually angry at something for a reason, instead of just getting angry for no reason, it hurts you. If then things are unjust in proportion to the justice of the anger they arouse in the victim, unrestraint arising from desire is more unjust than that arising from anger. For anger contains no element of wanton insolence. It is clear, therefore, that unrestraint in one's desire is more disgraceful than unrestraint in anger, and that it is in relation to bodily desires and pleasures that self-restraint and unrestraint are really manifested. But we must distinguish among the bodily desires and the pleasures themselves. As was said at the beginning, some of these are human and natural, both in kind and degree, some bestial, and some due to arrested development or disease. And then here is really an interesting one. Bestiality is less evil than vice, though more horrible. For a bad man can do 10,000 times more harm than an animal. That's a good quote. I'll read it again, and that's the end of the chapter. Bestiality is less evil than vice, though more horrible. For a bad man can do 10,000 times more harm than an animal. I do agree with that one. Anyways, we're getting about halfway through book 7. Remember, we're working up to Aristotle's Politics. So, what are y'all doing in order to inspire, uplift, and empower your local community today? Because this world isn't changing unless we all do our part, and you can count on me to do mine daily. Until next time, I love y'all.